This is the Lowell City Council Economic Development Subcommittee. We'll hold a public hearing. Today's date is Tuesday, June 9th, 2015, and we have one item on the agenda to vote on a pilot agreement from Enel. Roll call, please, Mr. Clerk.
Yeah.
Here.
Counsel Kennedy, Counsel Martin.
Here.
Counsel Rourke.
Here.
3 present.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. 3 present. I want to thank my colleagues for being here today. Councilor Rita Mercy is here. Councilor Jim Milanazzo. Councilor John Leahy. City Manager Murphy. Chief Tax Assessor Susan LeMay. Assistant City Manager Bob Healy. And thank you all for coming here this afternoon. But today's agenda is to discuss the pilot program from Enel. And Mr. Manager, for clarification purposes, I think we'll open it up with you for clarification purposes. Is that, long story short, this council is getting emails, phone calls that we're going to lose anywhere from $600 to $1.7 million in tax revenue. So please, let's hear it right from the source. What's going on here? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and through you to the members of the subcommittee and other city councilors present this evening. First of all, as you are all aware, this is just one component of a very complex and global settlement involving Enel Corporation. Contingent upon us receiving a $3.4 million Tiger grant from the
13.4.
13.4. What did I say? Okay, $13.4 million Tiger grant from the federal government. Then Enel has agreed, we agreed to take over the 8 bridges that they own so that we can have control over the maintenance of those bridges. But Enel has agreed to enter into a pilot agreement, which we have negotiated with Enel Corporation, which we feel is very reasonable. And as important as entering into this pilot agreement, they agree to dismiss with prejudice the pending Appellate Tax Board hearings that they have pending dating back to fiscal year 2008. So we believe that this is a very, very good settlement, and we believe that this part of the settlement, the pilot agreement, is a very good one for the city, and we recommend that you enter into it. Let me explain some of the basic details. First of all, the pilot agreement says that for the first 10 years, we are going to get 6.5% of Enel's gross revenues, or $500,000, whichever is greater. Now, I think this was good negotiation on the part of our chief assessor, because based upon our research and based upon a recommendation from our expert appraiser, it is his opinion, our opinion, that with the awarding of the Crestgate to Enel, their ability to generate revenue is going to increase by 10%. So their revenue is just going to increase more over the years, and we're going to be getting 6.5% of that gross revenue, or $500,000, whichever is higher. So based upon our projections, we're going to be receiving $500,000, more than $500,000 over the course of this pilot agreement. Couple that with the fact that we have a great exposure in the appellate tax board matters. Right now, since 2008, we have been assessing the Boot hydroelectric plant at the sum of $40 million. Enel feels that the value of it is $12.5 million. If we were to just cut the baby in half, as Solomon would say, is that our exposure in those appellate tax cases, if the appellate tax board came back and said that it should have only been assessed at $20 million, we're looking at having to pay back Enel close to $6 million. That's half. If the Appellate Tax Board felt that Enel's appraisal of their property was correct, we would have to pay Enel back $8.2 million. So as you can see, we have to look at not only what are we getting under the pilot, but what are we getting rid of as far as exposure. And our liability, our exposure at the Appellate Tax Board is very significant. Now, one would say, and I know I've read the emails that you have been privy to, they say that, well, under the original assessment, or what we've been assessing them at, we should be getting $1.7 million. That's not correct. Under the assessment we have right now, we should be getting $1.2 million. They then say, well, you're only going to get $500,000, so you have a $700,000 gap. Well, first of all, as I said in my prefatory remarks, since we're getting 6.5% of their gross revenues, which we are going to believe is going to be higher than $500,000, that gap isn't going to be that great. However, if there is a gap, we have an account which is known as the overlay account. And the purpose of the overlay account is that when we grant abatements to people, there's money in this account to pay to the tax levy the amount of money that we're losing under that abatement. And we grant abatements all the time, or the tax board grants abatements all the time. So we have this account known as the overlay account. And we know, as we sit here, whatever gap there is, whatever it is, whether it's 700,000 or whether it's 100,000, or it could be nothing, we have sufficient money in the overlay account to guarantee that there will be no negative impact on the taxpayers of the citizens of taxpayers of Lowell. There will be no tax increase. There will be no negative impact as a result of this pilot agreement being adopted. So based upon that, I really think that it's been a positive negotiation. It's been very difficult. As you know, we've had a number of meetings relative to this matter. We've had intense negotiations with Enel. They went up to the 11th hour, but we were able to put the deal together at the 11th hour. And I think it's a positive step forward for the city of Lowell, because we're not only talking about this pilot agreement and how it affects the taxation of Enel, but we're talking about public safety issues and quality of life issues for the city of Lowell by able to put this all together and take over those bridges and pay for the repair of those bridges with the Tiger grant. So I have my team here to answer any specific questions, but I just have to make it very, very clear is that there is going to be no negative tax impact to the residents of Lowell by accepting this pilot agreement that we are recommending to you.
Okay, Mr. Manager, thank you for that clarification, if you will. I'd also like to welcome Councilor Samaras, who is here as well. I'll open it up to my colleagues for questions, and I'd like to remind them that time is of the essence. It's only 30 minutes, this hearing, and there'll be another opportunity to discuss at the full council meeting. But I'll start with Councilor Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Manager, does this pilot agreement, does it stand alone? That is it tied into the Tiger grant so that without one you don't have the other?
Correct.
Okay. Without one you don't have the other?
Correct. What we did agree to, I will say though, is that Enel wanted to have a 20-year pilot anyway, no matter what happens, but we wouldn't agree to that. Okay. What we finally agreed to is that we would have a 5-year pilot no matter what.
Okay. And what I did was probably what the person that sent the email did was to look up all of the property in the city that Boot Hydro has, and I came up with 4 parcels, so I think that that's all that there is. And when you compute the tax for that, you end up with 1.7. But after that, I ended up speaking with the chairman of the Board of Assessors, who told me that 3 of those are just a tax exempt, so we don't get taxes from them, and that actually all of the all of the taxes lumped into 145 Pawtucket Street, which it comes out to the tax for it for FY15 is $1,274,000 and change. So I handed that out, but just to explain to the committee, it's the yellow one that matters, and the bottom line here is is incorrect because of that. Why is that the, why do we do that? Why are these three tax exempt, and why are they tax exempt, these other three parcels, to the chairman? Or is it that those taxes are lumped in with the 1.2?
They're just combined and lumped in with the 145 Pawtucket Street. It's just one tax bill that it's for one plant.
Okay. If we had a pilot program previously, and in the previous pilot program that we had, there was no seller of 500,000. It was just a percentage. And was that percentage 6.5 as well?
Yes, it was.
Okay. And over the years, didn't that fluctuate?
Yes, it did. It fluctuated between $457,000 and $657,000 a year.
Wasn't there a year where it was only 300 and something thousand?
It was 1 year. Yes, it was.
Okay. And so the way this pilot program is, the 6.5%, how do we verify that, and why is the mechanism for verification not included in the agreement itself?
Well, the way we verify it is they have to submit to us their gross revenues, but they also have to submit their gross revenues to the Department of Public Utilities. So we can verify them not only from what they submit to us, but what they submit to the Commonwealth as what their gross revenues are.
Okay.
And we have under the pilot that if we still don't agree, we can do an independent audit of their finances.
Okay. And so we felt that it wasn't necessary to put it right into the agreement how it would be verified, to just go with that? I mean, some thought was given to that, I'm assuming,
Yeah.
right?
And plus, I don't think they're going to mislead the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities with the figures that they're presenting to them as their revenues. But it is built in that we can do the audit of them.
Okay. Public perception, I think, might be that the city has lost the case over the bladder dam, or settled it out, and that we're settling out with Enel on this one as well. Now, I don't know that that's necessarily the case or the way that I would describe it, but I would understand how that could be the public perception. And when we say that there'll be no tax increase, we mean there's no tax increase this year. It doesn't mean in subsequent years there would be no tax increase, because basically, if we're losing $750,000 on this deal, on this arrangement, that almost wipes out any tax increase that we were anticipating from the Borden deal of a couple of weeks ago. So how would you address that? I guess I think what's important for the city council is to be able to explain why this is a good deal for the city.
First and foremost, I'll go back to my prefatory remarks, is that our exposure is close to $8 million if we were to lose the appellate tax board matters. And we would have to raise that $8 million in the tax levy to pay it. That would be a significant increase in taxes for the residents of Lowell. But beyond that, things like this, reductions in tax revenue happen all the time. For example, we anticipate that UMass Lowell is going to be buying 2 more buildings over across from their University Crossing. That's going to take those properties off the tax rolls. We're going to have to find new revenue sources to make up for that tax. The charter school is going to purchase the building that they're in on Jackson Street. We know that, and we're going to have to find ways to make up that loss in tax revenue. That's something that we do, this finance team does on a regular basis. And that's why the assessor is so important, to stimulate new growth, to make sure that new growth continues to increase so that we get more tax revenue, that we look to economic development to generate more tax revenue and more sources of revenue. So This happens all the time in the city. This is not a singular instance of a loss of tax or a perceived loss of tax revenue that we have to make up. So, it's something we do on a daily basis, and we will make up for this revenue in the years to come.
Okay. I think that the reason to vote for this, there's two compelling reasons, and one would be the Tiger grant. The second would be, as you, and I guess you've said them both, the second would be exposure. But what that means is the city really doesn't have a lot of confidence in its case before the Appellate Tax Board. Is that a fair statement?
No, I don't think that's a fair statement. But as a practicing lawyer, I know that 90% of all cases settle prior to trial. And that's because people realize that once you go to trial, it's all or nothing. And you can either win big or you can lose big. And that's why you reach compromises somewhere in the middle. That's what we're doing right here, is we're saying, listen, we can't guarantee that the Appellate Tax Board is going to uphold our assessment. So what we're going to do is we're going to adjust our risk and compromise at a figure that we think is fair and reasonable.
Does the Appellate Tax Board often settle cases by going with a compromise number that would be halfway between what each side thinks the value is?
Yes, that's a lot of times what happens.
Okay, and if that happened in this time, we would still be getting more than $500,000 in taxes, right? If they went, I mean, I've been told that sometimes Enel or Boot Hydro has been saying their property is worth 12.5, but other times they're saying it's worth 20. So the exposure that we had, that the city has, is somewhere between 5.8, or I think you said almost $6 million, up to $8 million. And so even if we were to play it out and just let the Appellate Tax Board decide, and if they decided halfway, we still would be better off than with the $500,000 base.
Oh, absolutely. And now we won't have to come up with $5 million from the taxpayers to pay off that liability.
Okay.
Yeah.
How many years are before the Appellate Tax Board? How many years do we?
7 years.
Why hasn't this been settled? Why has it gone on 7 years and it doesn't get settled? I mean, how does that happen?
Because we started out by working toward a pilot agreement for a couple of years. That kind of fell to the wayside. Then we started working on the Appellate Tax Board case. It went back into another agreement. At one point, they wanted us to consider the bridges with the prior administration. They didn't want it at all. The talks got cut off at that point. We went back into the Appellate Tax Board cases and then back into this agreement right here, and that's where we stand today.
So the reason that it's been lingering is because the court is waiting for us to reach an agreement with Boot Hydro, is that?
At this
fair?
point, they are right now, yes.
Is that why it's been, there's been no action? Is that why it's gone on for 7 years?
To date, yes, they're waiting for us right now. Yes.
Okay. All right, I don't think I have any questions at this time anymore.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Martin?
Thanks. So just to pick up on the 7 years, so there was a prior pilot agreement for 20 years, right? Then there was an extension for 1 year. And then we didn't reach agreement on a new extension, so we started to tax at what we determined to be the full rate.
Yes.
And that started around 07, 08?
There was a one-year extension for 2007.
Okay. But every year we've taxed at the higher rate, I assume is pending at the Appellate Tax Board, right? They've appealed every year.
From 2008 through 2015, there's 1 year that we did get dismissed at the Appellate Tax Board, and that was in 2009 due to a tax issue. But I believe that is being appealed right now through the SJC.
Okay. So, Mr. Manager, this is for 20 years again, but we have the right to limit it to 5, right? So those are my questions are on what circumstances do we limit it to 5?
If we do not receive the Tiger grant from the federal government, then we limit it to 5 years.
Right. But we're stuck with it for at least 5 years.
Yes.
And all these appellate tax board cases go away even if we don't get the Tiger grant. Is that,
No, that's not correct.
that's not?
That's not correct.
So those get revived?
If we don't get the Tiger grant.
So why is that? That just seems, if we're going to give them this break for 5 years,
Well,
shouldn't we resolve everything back?
well, they wanted it for 20 years.
Right.
With no reason. But remember, this is a global settlement.
Right.
Okay?
Yep.
So we're getting the bridges as part of this also. And if we didn't get the Tiger grant, then they're stuck with the bridges, and they wouldn't have the right to pursue the appellate tax board, so they would lose everything.
So that's their lever, right?
That's
For
their
these-
lever,
Their,
right.
their lever is these cases.
Right.
And for that, we're going to do this deal, which is probably, would you say, Clara, do you think this is a better deal than we had before, when we had a pilot agreement, because we have the floor?
Yes, absolutely. We have a floor of 500,000, plus the fact, based upon our expert opinion, is that their revenue is going to be greater in the future, and we're going to be getting 6.5% of that gross revenue. But, I mean, it's an excellent question, Counselor, but if we didn't get the Tiger grant, if they dismissed with prejudice right now all of their appellate tax board cases, then, and we didn't get the Tiger grant, then they would lose all of that appellate tax board cases, and they'd still have the 8 bridges that they were responsible for. So that was part of the negotiations.
Okay.
They wanted a full 20-year pilot, and I said, no. I said, we'll give you a 5-year, but not the full 20 unless we get the Tiger grant.
All right, so a lot rides on us getting the grant, right? And the bridges plus this liability.
Absolutely, and we took into account our feelings about the Tiger grant and our chances of receiving the Tiger grant. And it was interesting, just today we received, because we met with Secretary Pollock, the Secretary of Transportation for the Commonwealth last week, and this was one of the topics that came up. And today, she sent a copy of a letter that she mailed to the Tiger grant, saying that this Commonwealth is fully supportive of the City of Lowell's Tiger grant and recommends that it be adopted. So that's even one more positive thing in our chances of getting the Tiger grant.
All right. So this plant came online, did it come online around the time of the first pilot? Right?
Yes, it did.
So it's always had that, right? And I know other sort of energy facilities have been the recipients of pilot. I think like the Lenergia site over near the former Prince plant had a pilot agreement
Yes.
because they are sort of unique and hard to value, I guess. Is that fair to
Yes.
say? Or
Yeah, most of the plants that come online do have pilots. It's just such an unknown, and it's good for the communities to know what they're going to get every year.
Okay. So I think that I just want to put this in a little historical context, that this plant has always had this agreement, similar to other power plants in the city, or at least, I guess, clean energy type plants,
Yes.
right? So, and then we've had this sort of aberration while it's gone back and forth for the last 7 years or so, right? We're going to tax you more, fix the bridges, tax you more, fix the bridges, and that's, all right, we're going to go to the appellate tax board, or that's on hold because we're negotiating now. Negotiations are off, we're back at the appellate tax board. So that's been going on all this time.
That's exactly what happened.
So, so this gives us some certainty, right? Puts us back in the historical context. I can understand people look at the assessed value and say, oh, well, this is a huge windfall for the company, but there really is a significant exposure to the city, right?
Absolutely, Counselor,
All
very
right.
significant.
That's all I have, thanks.
Thank you, Councilor. We'll go to Councilor Milonazo, then Councilor Rourke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I understand that it is a global settlement, and I think that your team has really looked at it in that way as really a macro approach to taking care of a number of issues with ANEL. My question has to do with the 6.5% of gross revenue, or 500,000, whichever is higher in the first 10 years, say, and then the 6.5% of 450 through fiscal year 35. My question is, was there a reason? Again, I hope the 6.5 of gross revenue turns out to be $1 million, because it is whichever is higher. But was there any discussion about tying whatever number we get to the consumer price index? Because in fiscal year 2035, $450,000 is not worth what $450,000 is worth in fiscal year 15 or 16. So I'm just curious as to, was there any discussion relative to tying it into what the dollar is worth today versus what it's going to be worth in 20 years?
No, there wasn't any discussion on that other than the income itself. Period. Sorry.
Again, I'd be more concerned with
Yeah.
whichever is less, but it is whichever is higher. But at the same time, if it ends up being $450,000 in fiscal year 35, that's probably the equivalent of $150,000 in fiscal year 15, I guess.
From a frame of reference, though, on the income approach, 5% is the floor, and this has been up to, and by mutual agreement and tough negotiations, to the 6.5%. So the difference between the old pilot and this one is the guarantee of the 500,000, with the expectation that the 6.5% will produce a greater number, which will grow with inflation and price of energy.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you,
I
Councilor.
just would add, Councilor Martin's point, this is very common amongst what the Commonwealth had tried to do to incentivize clean energy, so-called, which was allow for pilot agreements to encourage the utilization of non-fossil fuel energy throughout the Commonwealth. So hydro, wind, solar are all subject of pilot agreements.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Healy, for that clarification. Before I go to Councilor Rourke, I'd like to open up to the public. Anybody who'd like to have any discussion on this issue? The ANEL pilot agreement? Yes, ma'am. Please step up to the podium and state your name and address for the record, please.
Linda Harvey, 48 Melrose Avenue in Lowell.
Thank you. Go ahead.
My question is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Adam, well, my statement is first that 94% of the Tiger grants are not granted. Is that correct?
Ma'am, address your questions to the board, please, and we'll
All right.
answer them to you, okay?
Excuse me.
Is that your only question?
No.
Okay, go ahead.
I want to also know why a profit-making company is getting a pilot grant in the first place, a pilot deal. You know, they're not a hospital, they're not a school, you know, I can't find any economic benefit they provide to the city.
Okay, thank you. And so, any more questions, ma'am?
Not at this time.
Okay, let's get you an answer. Thank you for your input. Mr. Manager, could you answer?
Well,
Mrs.
first of
Harvey?
all, schools and hospitals in Lowell are tax exempt. They don't pay taxes at all. But there are many private companies that get pilot agreements, and they're paying taxes to the city. They may not be paying as much as some people would like, but they are paying taxes to the city. And so ANEL will be paying a significant amount of taxes to the city of Lowell. In reference to the Tiger grants are very competitive, and they're difficult to get. But we have done a concerted effort between the city and UMass Lowell and our federal delegation to lobby for this Tiger grant, and the state via Secretary Pollock's letter of support. We have a consultant working in Washington on this matter, and we're confident that we're going to get the Tiger grant, and that's why we have pushed forward with, which I think from this council standpoint is precedent-setting action on your behalf, and I think you're going to be proud with what happens down the road.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. And to answer for the first half of Mrs. Harvey's question is that, and Lowell has never applied for a Tiger grant in the past, correct? Have we?
Yes, we have, but
Oh,
we
we have,
haven't
okay.
received them.
Okay, all right. Okay, well, thank you. I think that answers Mrs. Harvey's questions. Councilor Rourke?
Yeah, quickly, thank you, Mr. Chairman. How did the 500,000 number come up? How was that, what made that number appropriate?
That was a negotiated number between Enel and the city.
If I could just add to that, if you do a historical analysis of the prior 20-year pilot that we had, the average was about $507,000 that was generated over the course of the 20 years. So the 500,000 level was reasonable under the circumstances, and that's what was the final negotiations.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Rourke. Any other? Samaras? Okay. Councilor Kennedy, do you have an additional question?
I just have two additional questions to the chairman. If Enel thinks that their plant is worth somewhere between $12.5 million and $20 million, how did we arrive at $39 million? How did we arrive at that value?
That was the appraiser that we hire every 3 years when we do a revaluation. The appraiser actually came out with that number in 2008 when we did the reval, was the $40 million. And the Department of Revenue mandates that we use that number based on his appraisal. And every 3 years, whatever number he comes up with, whatever the appraised number is what we have to use on our records.
And is this like a company that just does mass appraisal? They're appraising everything in the city at the same time?
Oh, no, this is a company that just does power plants.
Okay. And so aren't we confident that that's a good number? But they have an appraisal, they've got an appraisal that says it's worth 12.5 to 20?
Well, they have an appraisal for every year. We have an appraisal for every 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah, they have appraisals. They have multiple appraisals.
Okay. I guess, thank you. I guess, Mr. Manager, what's required here is tremendous faith in the city getting that Tiger grant. I mean, if it were to happen that we weren't going to get the Tiger grant, and then we were going to enter into the 5-year pilot, and that was it, that would be, we wouldn't look that good. So we were, right?
No, I disagree with that. I think this pilot agreement is fair and reasonable. I think that the terms of it is a good result for the city of Lowell. The only issue that's outstanding is their ability to go back to the appellate tax board for the previous years. And that is the risk that we run. But I wouldn't be here before you today and taking that risk unless I was confident we were going to get the Tiger grant.
Okay. If we think that the pilot is fair and reasonable, doesn't that mean that we think that our assessment is too high?
I think it's a question of risk versus reward, is that you may not agree, they may not accept ours as the true amount. They may not accept Enel's as the true low amount and come out somewhere in the middle. And that's what we're doing.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the public before I adjourn the meeting? Or my colleagues, any additional question? Okay, we do have a public safety subcommittee, so with all due respect, can I get a motion?
Motion to adjourn?
Motion, meeting adjourned. Thank you.